Billionaire Arab buys single mother at an auction to have a child, but what he discovers leaves him shocked. Khalid al-Rashid was the kind of man whose name alone commanded both respect and curiosity. At 38, he was one of the wealthiest men in the Arab world, a billionaire whose empire spanned industries from real estate to technology. Despite his immense success, Khalid remained an enigma, a figure more often whispered about than understood. His life was an endless parade of luxury. Private jets, sprawling estates, and the finest art and antiquities money could buy. Yet behind the glittering facade lay a restlessness that no amount of wealth could cure. For Khalid, legacy was everything, and it was one thing his fortune couldn't secure. He wanted a child, an heir to carry his name, to inherit his empire. But Khalid's cold and calculated nature had left him with few close relationships. Love was a complication he had neither the patience nor the time for. He wanted a family on his terms, devoid of emotional entanglements. In the heart of Dubai, Khalid's closest confidant, Rashad, approached him with an unusual proposition. Rashad, a man with a taste for secrets and a network of connections rivaling Khalid's, spoke with cautious confidence. "There is an exclusive event, Khalid," Rashad said, sliding a discreet black envelope across the polished marble desk. "A private auction. Unique opportunities for men of vision like yourself." Khalid raised an eyebrow, opening the envelope to reveal an invitation embossed in gold. "And what exactly is being auctioned?" Rashad hesitated, then leaned in. "Surrogacy agreements, but not through clinics. Women who are vetted, exceptional candidates. It's discreet, legal, and ensures you get exactly what you want without the usual complications." Khalid's lips tightened. The idea intrigued him but also unsettled him. It was unconventional even for him. "You're suggesting I buy a mother for my child as though I'm bidding on a piece of art?" "Think of it as ensuring the finest lineage for your family," Rashad replied smoothly. "The women understand the arrangement. They're compensated generously and given complete autonomy once the agreement ends." Khalid set the invitation aside, his mind swirling with thoughts. The concept was starkly transactional, but that was precisely why it appealed to him. No messy emotions, no drawn-out negotiations. Just a business deal, a clear path to securing his legacy. Still, something about the idea lingered in his mind long after Rashad left. For the first time in years, Khalid felt a flicker of uncertainty. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Cairo, a single mother named Yasmin Ibrahim struggled to make ends meet. At 27, Yasmin had faced more hardship than most people twice her age. She worked long hours at a local cafe while raising her 6-year-old son, Amir, whose boundless energy and warm smile were her sole sources of joy. But joy didn't pay bills. Yasmin was drowning in debt left behind by her late husband, and the mounting pressure threatened to crush her spirit. One evening, as she sorted through a stack of overdue notices, her landlord came knocking with a grim ultimatum: pay up or vacate. Desperation gnawed at her, and she knew she was running out of options. The next day, an acquaintance approached her with an unusual suggestion. "There's a way out," the woman said, her voice low. "An auction in Dubai. Women like us go there. They're looking for surrogates, well-compensated arrangements. You could secure Amir's future." Yasmin was appalled at first. The thought of auctioning herself felt dehumanizing. But the image of her son's innocent face and the weight of her financial burdens pushed her to reconsider. "If it's for Amir," she whispered to herself that night, "I can endure anything." As the weeks passed, Khalid's curiosity deepened. He read the auction terms meticulously, scrutinized the profiles of the women who participated, and consulted legal experts. Eventually, he made his decision. The night of the auction approached, and Khalid prepared himself for what he anticipated would be a straightforward transaction. Little did he know, the woman he would meet there, and the secrets she carried, would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself and his plans. Yasmin stood in her modest bedroom, staring at the single suitcase on her bed. It was filled with only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, a picture of Amir, and a small toy car he had insisted she take for luck. She had told him she was traveling for work, a half-truth that weighed heavily on her heart. "Be good for Aunt Layla," Yasmin said as she knelt to hug Amir. The boy wrapped his arms tightly around her neck, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I'll miss you, Mama," he whispered. Yasmin held him for a long moment, blinking back tears. "I'll be back soon," she promised, kissing the top of his head. "And when I return, everything will be better. Promise." The flight to Dubai was surreal. Yasmin had never left Egypt, let alone flown on an airplane. The opulence of the city stunned her. Towering skyscrapers that gleamed like jewels, luxury cars gliding effortlessly along pristine roads, and a sense of extravagance that seemed to belong to another world. She was met at the airport by a professional woman in a sharp black suit, who introduced herself as Nadia, one of the auction's coordinators. "We'll take you to your accommodations," Nadia said with a polite but detached smile. "The auction begins tomorrow evening. You'll receive instructions then." Yasmin nodded silently, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline. Elsewhere in the city, Khalid sat in his penthouse, overlooking the glittering skyline. The private auction was on his mind, though he hadn't yet admitted to himself why. It wasn't simply about securing an heir. It was about control, about proving that his life, his legacy, was entirely within his grasp. His assistant, Kareem, entered the room with a tablet. "The final list of candidates has been updated," Kareem said, handing it over. Khalid scrolled through the profiles, each woman's photograph accompanied by a brief biography. Educated, healthy, capable. Each was carefully selected to fit the auction's stringent criteria. Yet none of them sparked his interest, until he saw her, Yasmin Ibrahim. Her photograph was unassuming, a woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength in her expression. Her biography was brief but honest, detailing her struggles as a single mother and her motivation for joining the auction. Khalid paused, something unidentifiable tugging at him. She wasn't the polished, poised type he expected to see on such a list. She was real. "Mark her as a priority," he said, handing the tablet back to Kareem. The auction was held in the grand ballroom of one of Dubai's most exclusive hotels. Yasmin arrived in a simple yet elegant dress provided by the coordinators, her heart pounding as she entered the lavishly decorated space. The room was filled with men like Khalid, powerful, wealthy, and accustomed to getting whatever they wanted. Yasmin felt their eyes on her, assessing her, though she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Nadia guided her to a private lounge where the other women waited. Each was beautiful, composed, and confident in ways Yasmin felt she could never match. "Remember," Nadia said to the group, her tone professional but firm, "this is a negotiation. You have as much agency as they do. Don't settle for anything less than what you deserve." Yasmin nodded, though her nerves threatened to undo her. Khalid arrived at the auction with his usual air of detachment. He exchanged pleasantries with a few acquaintances but remained focused on the task at hand. As the event began, the host explained the process. Each woman would be introduced, and interested bidders could approach to negotiate privately. When Yasmin's turn came, Khalid watched her closely. She was graceful but unpretentious, her gaze steady despite the obvious nerves she tried to conceal. Something about her struck him, an unpolished honesty that set her apart from the others. As the host announced her name and basic details, Khalid found himself moving toward her without hesitation. He wasn't entirely sure why, but he knew one thing: he had to speak to her. Yasmin saw Khalid approaching and felt a wave of unease. He was tall, with dark, sharp features and an undeniable presence. His tailored suit and confident stride screamed wealth and power, but his expression was unreadable. "Miss Ibrahim," Khalid said, his voice low and even. "I'm Khalid al-Rashid. May we speak privately?" Yasmin hesitated, then nodded, following him to a small seating area. Their conversation was guarded at first. Khalid asked her about her motivations for attending, her life in Cairo, and her son. Yasmin answered honestly but cautiously, unsure of how much to reveal. "You're here for him," Khalid said, his tone more a statement than a question. "Yes," Yasmin replied, her voice steady. "Everything I do is for him." Khalid leaned back slightly, studying her. "You're different from the others," he said. "Most of them are here for the money or the lifestyle. But you'd walk away from it all if it meant your son was safe." Yasmin met his gaze, surprised by the insight in his words. "Yes," she said quietly. "I would." As the evening wore on, Khalid found himself returning to Yasmin's profile in his mind. She wasn't what he expected. She was a single mother, struggling yet unbroken. And something about her resilience stirred something in him he didn't fully understand. By the end of the night, Khalid made his decision. He would bid for her, not just because she was the most logical choice, but because she represented something he hadn't realized he needed: authenticity. Little did he know, Yasmin carried a secret that would turn his carefully calculated world upside down. The grand ballroom of the Al Riyadh Grand Palace buzzed with anticipation. Beneath the glittering chandeliers, a symphony of whispered conversations and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air. The private auction had reached its most exclusive phase, the introduction of the special lots, the women whose profiles had been carefully vetted and who were considered ideal candidates for the unique agreements being offered. Khalid sat at a private table near the front, his sharp gaze fixed on the stage. Around him, other bidders displayed varying degrees of interest, some murmuring to assistants, others idly flipping through dossiers. Khalid remained impassive, though his mind was anything but calm. Yasmin Ibrahim's profile had intrigued him more than he cared to admit. Something about her story, her quiet resilience, her determination to provide for her son, stood out in stark contrast to the polished and rehearsed presentations of the other candidates. He had come here to secure a practical arrangement, but now, he found himself compelled by something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. Backstage, Yasmin adjusted the hem of her dress, her hands trembling. She had never been in a situation like this before, paraded before strangers like an object to be appraised and purchased. Yet, for Amir's sake, she steeled herself. "Next up, Nadia, the auction coordinator," said with a reassuring smile. "Yasmin Ibrahim." Yasmin took a deep breath and stepped forward, the bright lights of the stage momentarily blinding her. The room fell quiet as the host began to introduce her. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Yasmin Ibrahim, a single mother from Cairo. She brings not only beauty and grace, but a deep commitment to family values. Miss Ibrahim is here to secure a brighter future for her young son, and she seeks an arrangement built on mutual respect." As the host spoke, Yasmin stood tall, forcing herself to meet the eyes of the audience. She caught glimpses of curiosity, indifference, and, in some cases, thinly veiled condescension. And then her gaze met Khalid's. Khalid leaned forward slightly, his piercing eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the bustling ballroom seemed to fade away. Yasmin felt a shiver run down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was fear or something else. "Shall we open the floor to bids?" the host announced, breaking the spell. One by one, potential bidders approached Yasmin, each offering terms that felt as transactional as a business negotiation. Some spoke of lavish compensation and extravagant lifestyles, while others emphasized the exclusivity of their agreements. Yasmin responded politely, but none of their words resonated with her. She felt like a commodity, her humanity overshadowed by the weight of their wealth. When Khalid rose from his seat and walked toward her, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Ibrahim," he said, his voice low and measured. "May I speak with you?" Yasmin nodded, her heart pounding as he led her to a private alcove. "I understand this must feel overwhelming," Khalid began, his tone softer than she expected. "But I want you to know I'm not here to make empty promises or to take advantage of your situation." Yasmin tilted her head, skeptical. "Then why are you here?" Khalid hesitated for a moment, then spoke with uncharacteristic honesty. "I want a family, Miss Ibrahim, an heir. But I don't want the complications of a traditional relationship. I'm looking for someone who understands the arrangement for what it is. A partnership, not a romance." His words were blunt, but there was no malice in them, only a kind of pragmatism that Yasmin found oddly refreshing. "And what would this partnership entail?" she asked, crossing her arms. You and your son would have everything you need, Khalid said. A home, financial security, access to the best schools and opportunities. In return, I ask only for your commitment to raising the child we would have together with the same love and dedication you've shown your son. Yasmin studied him carefully. There was something genuine in his voice, a sincerity that stood out amid the empty flattery of the other bidders. But the weight of his proposal wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just about money or stability, it was a lifelong commitment. And if I agree, she asked cautiously. You'll never have to struggle again, Khalid said simply. Your son will have the future you want for him. And you'll be treated with respect and dignity. Always. Yasmin's heart ached at the thought of Amir. His laughter, his innocence, his boundless hope. She had sacrificed so much for him already. Could she sacrifice a part of herself to secure his future? I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Khalid replied, inclining his head. Take all the time you need. As Yasmin returned backstage, her mind swirled with questions. Khalid's proposal was unlike anything she had heard that night. He didn't try to charm her or dazzle her with promises of wealth. Instead, he spoke with clarity and purpose, as though he had already decided she was the right choice. Meanwhile, Khalid returned to his table, his composure steady, though his thoughts were far from calm. He couldn't explain it, but Yasmin's presence had unsettled something in him. He had come here for a simple transaction. Yet now, as he watched her disappear behind the curtains, he realized this decision would be anything but simple. As the evening drew to a close, the bidders finalized their agreements. Khalid waited, his gaze fixed on the stage, knowing that the real test was yet to come. For both of them. The following morning, Yasmin woke to the soft hum of the city outside her hotel window. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind. Her meeting with Khalid, his calm yet commanding presence, and his unexpected sincerity. She had expected arrogance or entitlement, but his proposal had been different, almost disarmingly practical. She glanced at the picture of Amir she had placed on the nightstand. His bright smile seemed to reassure her, yet it also reminded her of the stakes. This wasn't just about her. It was about him. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. When she opened it, Nadia, the auction coordinator, stood there with her ever-composed expression. Khalid al-Rashid has requested a meeting, Nadia said. If you're ready to proceed. Yasmin hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The meeting was held in a private suite at the Al Riyadh Grand Palace. Khalid stood by the window when Yasmin entered, his silhouette outlined by the golden morning light streaming through the glass. He turned as she approached, offering a polite nod. Miss Ibrahim, he greeted. Thank you for coming. Yasmin sat across from him at a sleek glass table. I've had time to think about your proposal, she began, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. And, Khalid prompted, his expression unreadable. I'll agree to the arrangement, Yasmin said, clasping her hands together. But I have conditions. Khalid arched an eyebrow, intrigued. I'm listening. Yasmin took a deep breath. First, my son Amir must be treated as part of your family, not as an outsider or an obligation, but as someone who belongs. Of course, Khalid said without hesitation. That was always my intention. Second, Yasmin continued, I retain full autonomy over my life. I won't be treated as a possession or a subordinate. This partnership must be based on mutual respect. Agreed, Khalid replied. You'll have complete freedom within the boundaries of the arrangement. And lastly, she said, her voice firm, I want Amir to understand that this is a choice I made for him. I want him to know I didn't give up on him, no matter how unconventional this may seem. Khalid leaned back in his chair, studying her with a faint smile. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Ibrahim, but I respect your priorities. Consider your conditions accepted. The weight of the agreement settled over both of them as they signed the necessary documents. Khalid's legal team, discreet and efficient, ensured everything was in order. Yasmin felt a pang of unease as she put pen to paper, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. For Amir. For his future. As the meeting concluded, Khalid extended his hand. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Ibrahim," he said. Yasmin shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Khalid." For a moment, their eyes met, and Yasmin saw something in him she hadn't noticed before. A flicker of vulnerability behind his composed exterior. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but it left her wondering. The next few days were a whirlwind. Yasmin was relocated to a luxurious villa in Khalid's private compound, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Dubai. The transition was jarring. Her modest life in Cairo felt like a distant memory as she adjusted to the opulence around her. Amir arrived soon after, his wide-eyed wonder at the new surroundings a bittersweet reminder of why Yasmin had agreed to this. Khalid made a point to greet him personally, kneeling to the boy's level and offering a warm smile. "You must be Amir," Khalid said, extending his hand. Amir hesitated, then shook it. "You're really tall," he said, his voice full of childlike awe. Khalid chuckled, a rare sound that surprised even him. "And you're braver than most men I've met." Yasmin watched the exchange with cautious optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, this arrangement could work. But beneath the surface of this newfound harmony, secrets lingered. Khalid had entered this agreement with clarity and purpose, but Yasmin's presence was beginning to unsettle him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her quiet strength, her devotion to her son, and the way she carried herself with dignity and grace. It all struck a chord he wasn't prepared to face. Meanwhile, Yasmin found herself increasingly curious about Khalid. He was more than just the wealthy, stoic man she had imagined. There were moments, fleeting, unguarded moments, when she saw traces of loneliness and regret in his eyes. One evening, as they sat in the villa's garden watching Amir play, Khalid turned to Yasmin. "You've surprised me," he admitted. "How so?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I expected this to be a transaction," Khalid said. "But you've made it more complicated. In a way that I don't entirely dislike." Yasmin smiled faintly, her own feelings equally conflicted. "I didn't come here to complicate things, Khalid. I came here to survive. And yet, here we are," Khalid said, his voice tinged with a hint of something deeper. As the days turned into weeks, the arrangement began to feel less like a business deal and more like the foundation of something neither of them had anticipated. But just as they began to navigate their new roles, a revelation would soon come to light, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The villa was unusually quiet one warm evening. Khalid had just returned from a meeting in the city, his mood tense from the relentless pressures of managing his empire. As he stepped into the sprawling living room, he found Yasmin seated on the couch, her expression unreadable. In her hands was a folder, one of the many left on the desk in his study. "Yasmin," Khalid said cautiously, his sharp eyes flicking to the folder. "What's that?" She looked up at him, her face pale but composed. "This was in your study. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was looking for something for Amir, and I found this." Khalid's jaw tightened as he walked closer. "You shouldn't have been in my study," he said, his tone low but firm. "I know," Yasmin replied, "but I couldn't ignore it." "Khalid, what is this?" She opened the folder and held up a photograph. It was an old picture, faded and worn, of a younger Khalid standing beside a man and a woman. The woman looked strikingly familiar, her dark eyes and warm smile an uncanny reflection of Yasmin's own. Khalid stared at the photograph, the color draining from his face. He exhaled sharply and sat down across from her. "Where did you find that?" "In the drawer of your desk," Yasmin said. "Who are they?" Khalid leaned back, his hands running over his face. "They're my parents," he said finally. "And the woman, she's your mother." The air in the room grew heavy as Khalid explained, his voice wavering with the weight of the truth. "Your mother and my father. They were connected," he began. "Before my father married my mother, he was deeply in love with someone else. Your mother, Layla Ibrahim. She was the only woman he ever truly loved." Yasmin's breath caught. "But my mother never told me about this. She never spoke of your father." "She wouldn't have," Khalid said, his voice thick with emotion. "Their relationship was forbidden." My family didn't approve and the pressure was too much. My father was forced to marry into another prominent family to secure our status. But he never stopped loving her. Yasmin stared at him, the pieces of her family's past falling into place. You're saying my mother? And your father? They had a child together, Khalid said, his gaze piercing. But when they were forced apart, my father couldn't claim the child. He supported her financially from a distance but couldn't be involved in your life. That child was you, Yasmin. The revelation hit Yasmin like a tidal wave. She stood, pacing the room as her mind raced. You're saying you knew about this the entire time? That I'm your sister. No, Khalid said firmly. You're not my sister. My father married my mother shortly after Layla left. You and I share no blood. Yasmin stopped, her hands trembling. But why didn't you tell me? Why keep this from me? I didn't know until recently, Khalid admitted. My father's journals were given to me after his passing, and I pieced together the truth. I hadn't planned on telling you. This arrangement was supposed to remain simple. But now, he trailed off, his expression unreadable. Yasmin sank into a chair, her world spinning. The man she had entered into a life-altering agreement with had ties to her family she'd never known. The lines between business, family, and something deeper blurred in ways she couldn't comprehend. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Neither do I, Khalid said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. But you deserved to know the truth. The days that followed were tense and filled with silence. Yasmin avoided Khalid, retreating to her room or spending her time with Amir in the garden. Khalid, for his part, respected her distance but couldn't ignore the unease settling in his chest. He hadn't anticipated how deeply this revelation would affect him. For years, he had prided himself on his control, his ability to keep emotion out of his decisions. But Yasmin was different. She wasn't just part of an arrangement anymore. She was tied to his family's past in a way he couldn't deny. One evening, as the sun set over the villa, Khalid found Yasmin sitting alone on the balcony. He hesitated before approaching, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. May I join you? He asked. She nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. After a moment, Khalid spoke. I didn't mean for things to happen this way. I wanted everything to be clear, simple. But life has a way of complicating even the best-laid plans. Yasmin turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to move forward from this, Khalid. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about this arrangement, has changed. I know, Khalid said, but I want to make one thing clear. My intentions haven't changed. I want to give you and Amir the life you deserve. And I want to honor the bond our families share. Yasmin studied him, her emotions a tangle of confusion, gratitude, and something deeper she couldn't name. You really believe we can make this work? I do, Khalid said, his voice steady. If you're willing to try, so am I. For the first time in days, Yasmin allowed herself a faint smile. Then let's try. As the stars emerged above them, Khalid and Yasmin sat in quiet understanding, knowing that their journey was far from over but willing to face it together.